Now, I find that once you get into a conversation that you are interested in, that's when you go, well, maybe I can do something different about this, right? And whether it's operations or HR or well being or culture, get involved. If it's something that matters to you, you've got colleagues that are being affected by this. And I think physicians want to have impact. The most natural place to have impact is patient care, but having impact on our colleagues enables larger scale patient care to be bettered.
Physicians are, for the most part, they're wired to make a difference. Somewhere along the way, if we stopped allowing them the opportunity to make a difference outside of that bedside exam room, emergency room moment. And if you allow it, I think you will find many more volunteers than you realize who are interested in making a difference. And they've been absorbing, listening, learning, hearing things for years. And if we give them a chance to speak about it and maybe invest some time into it, they will enable the difference that they want to make. Hello and welcome to the Fire Chief Podcast, the only podcast dedicated to the Chief Medical Officer. I'm your host, Lee Scheinbart, and along with a fabulous team at the CMO Group, we bring you the most crucial conversations in healthcare and physician leadership. The CMO Group is the only physician-run and physician-led organization focused solely on Chief Medical Officers and exists to transform how physicians lead. The group helps CMOs and emerging physician leaders move from expert operators to enterprise leaders through a unique transformational process. Healthcare doesn't just need good doctors and leadership. It needs high-powered executives with deep medical knowledge, and that transformation is the work of the CMO group. Our guest today is Dr. Ern Chen, a leading expert in value-based care and physician workforce transformation. Dr. Chen accomplished her undergraduate education, medical school, and general surgery training at Washington University in St. Louis and Barnes Jewish Hospital, followed by a pediatric surgery fellowship at the Children's Hospital of Wisconsin. She also earned a Master of Clinical Science from the University of Texas Southwestern. With over 20 years of hands-on clinical and executive leadership experience ranging from pediatric to geriatric populations in primary to quaternary care settings, Dr. Chen brings a deep practical understanding of physician workload, care models, compensation structures, and leadership dynamics to her work. Today, she holds the role of market leader for physician solutions at Korn Ferry, a leading global talent acquisition firm with a focus on designing organizational structures, assessing capability, and managing culture change. At Korn Ferry, Lee partners with healthcare organizations to facilitate the redesign of care delivery and to address complex physician workforce challenges, including retention, scalability, and operational efficiency. Lee, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Lee. A real pleasure to be here and chatting with you today.
We are very happy to have you. We have a lot to get into, but first, I have to put a shout out to Jim Vincoli, Vice President at Korn Ferry Global Health and responsible for their Workforce Solutions division. And it was he who introduced us and also shared a report with me that will be the key focus of our show today. Let me talk about that report, and if you want to add anything, go ahead. This report, as I understand it, is based off of a survey of physician leaders, chief financial officers, and other executives. It was published in 2026, and it reveals that the financial results, cost containment, and workforce stability are the dominant items in today's meeting agendas in healthcare environments. Is that accurate?
That's 1,000% correct. And what we did was we put out a survey at the end of last year, really to physician executives to say, what are you thinking? What's on your mind? What's your goal as you go into 2026? What are the main pressures you're feeling? And what do physician executives need to have in their minds, in their hearts, their back pockets to be effective in their roles? So I'm really excited that some of what we put out resonated with you and that we get to have a dialogue around that today.
Yeah, it absolutely caught my attention, and we're going to get into some of those details. I think that what a lot of people do not appreciate is that when you're not in the meeting, you wonder what people are talking about. Well, we're going to bring out what those discussions look and feel like, and specifically how to help CMOs who may not be in those rooms at all times begin to think about how these types of priorities matter to them and what they can be doing. And all of this is happening with massive technological transformation, trying to understand the ROI on what's changing in healthcare, how to get more identifiable impacts with the workforce, much more than compensation now, but the culture and well being and retention. And so, if you're ready, we can start getting into these questions.
Let's do it, Lee.
All right, here we go. So, question number one. So, given how important finances are in healthcare, in your own opinion, as a very seasoned leader, let's start with how chief medical officers and other emerging leaders best equip themselves to speak the language of healthcare finances within their role and in their organization.
Yeah, that's so importantly. In this era, financial performance and cost containment are top of almost everybody's mind, right? They're the dominant priorities. That's what our survey showed. And I think we all feel it as physician executives. The first thing really is to reframe finance from what we think as a constraint to actually an enabler. I mean, we say this often, and it's actually true, right? Margin does sustain mission. And for physicians, that means margin sustains clinical care, care delivery, the new ways we want to do things, new delivery models. We do need positive financial performance in order to enable all of that. For CMOs to be a really sort of key piece of that and to be able to contribute successfully, they have to build fluency in a few core levers. And this is where finance and medicine meet, right? So things like cost per case for surgery and surgeons and proceduralists, things like length of stay, throughput, even labor cost as a percentage of revenue. So these are all ways that physicians are used to thinking about the clinical side, or maybe a better way to say it is physicians are more adept at thinking about these from the clinical perspective and meeting finance, because all these things have dollars associated with them. So meeting finance from the clinical end. Being able to translate clinical decisions, clinical operational decisions into financial dollars and cents. Things like, okay, so if we reduce length of stay by half a day, what does that do to capacity? What does that do to revenue, right? It's not just, well, we're going to send patients home on average half a day sooner. How does that actually impact the finances? And being able to do this connection and melding of the clinical side and the financial side allows the CMO to be credible in both rooms, the clinical room with fellow clinicians, as well as the financial room with the CFOs and their teams. So being able to partner longitudinally, not episodically, with a CFO is so critical. And understanding some of these clinical implications for the finance side is something that CMOs need to be able to do today and will be effective.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more because back in the day, the CMO was much more in charge of medical affairs, credentialing, privileging, some of the basic elements that keep the medical staff aligned with the care delivery. But I think you're absolutely right. It is imperative. And it's not like everybody has to go get an MBA. I don't have one, but you do have to know the language and be authentically able to convey the message that I don't think I've ever heard it phrased the way you did it, that the margin is an enabler of the work that we do. It feels like a constraint. It does feel that way, but to help people understand that this brings more to us than takes away from us is something that's probably going to take a while for physicians to come around to. And I'll tell you one more thing. If you've been in practice by yourself or with a group, you totally get it because margins were going down in your own independent practice and you had to find a way to drive more revenue to enable your practice.
Yes.
There's no difference. It's just that how you then split up the money, that can be destructive if it's not done fairly and equitably. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts on that?
I completely agree. And I'll add one other element, building off what you said about being genuine and being visible as a leader. Building that trust with your physician base enables you when times are tight to be able to make trade offs with them, right? I mean, physicians are rational, evidence based, data driven people. They understand there's only so much in the pot. They can help grow your pot, but at the end of the day, it's not an infinite money tree you can just go out and shake, right? And
Yeah.
so being that trust partner, I like to say a physician leader, a CMO, is first among equals because it can be a very flat hierarchy. And having that mentality that you're a leader of your comrades, and they're not necessarily your employees, but they are your professional partners in what you're all trying to do, allows you then to translate some of those financial things into those trade-offs and for those to be accepted. And ask your physicians for help, right? When trade-offs have to be made, let them have a voice in it. So it's not a command and control thing, but it's done as a group.
This reminds me, and perhaps you had this experience as a surgeon, the pathologist would love to say, I'm the doctor's doctor, because we need that doctor to help us do our doctoring.
Right.
And, I'm an oncologist, you're a surgeon. So yeah, I always like to think that a chief medical officer should be the doctor's doctor, the staff's doctor on
Absolutely.
equal footing, but enabling them to do the work that they're there to do. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about workforce for a second, because the financial language certainly translates to the workforce. And what I mean is, how should those same CMOs and physician leaders equip both themselves and the people that they're with around conceptualizing workforce? Again, you and I grew up in an era that was a lot more independence in practice, and now it's much more an employment structure. So how can leaders approach this new paradigm, if you will, and establish that it's a priority?
Yeah, and I think the reason that it is a priority is that workforce is such a financial lever and can be such a financial lever. It's totally underutilized. We always say people, process, technology. The truth is we throw a lot of process and technology and those are expensive. But what about the people part? The first word in people, process, and technology. Have we optimized that? And specifically for the physician workforce, we haven't, right? And, I think we need to stop viewing workforce as staffing. That's a very easy place to go when you think workforce. You're thinking, how many slots do I have and how many people do I need in them? But workforce today, for multiple reasons, right? Workforce is a system design issue, right? In some places, it might be a system design problem that needs to be solved, but it's system design, right? And it's not an individual issue. Some will equate, and you'll hear this in the popular press, you'll hear this in the literature, that burnout is a resilience issue. I like to reframe that and say it's not. You're dealing with physicians. Physicians went through umpteen years of school and training. They have resilience to get to where they are, right? So it's a structural failure that is now causing burnout. So, what the focus needs to be on, really at the enterprise level, is workload design, right? Not FTE counts, but the design of the entire system. Team based care models, how those teams function and how you're serving the community. And then reducing friction, right? Cognitive burden, administrative burden. How do you take care of all of these things with the least amount of friction or with no friction? Deliver the joy back into what we're doing. Physicians went into medicine to take care of people, to take care of families, to take care of communities. So how do we get back to that core with as little quote unquote busy work as possible? Those are all system design issues. And then to continue, the other thing we need to do is if you're going to make something a priority, you have to be able to measure it. Because if you don't know what your baseline is, you don't know where you're starting from, and you don't know the scope of your problem. And if you can't measure it, you also don't know whether you've actually impacted it. And so, things like turnover, vacancies, locum spend, and even engagement scores. These are all things we measure today, but to link them to workforce health or the health of a workforce now gives it a different level of import. So treat your workforce like capital, invest in them upfront to avoid costs downstream.
I couldn't agree more with workforce as capital. The cost of money is what CFOs think about when they're borrowing money, when they're using credit, when they're investing some of that, budgetary items. They think about the cost and return of money. You can think of the workforce the same way. If you invest appropriately, the return is astronomical. Our research at the CMO group is if you develop leaders, you will get a benefit. And it's not a financial benefit, it's a commitment to the organization to begin to own the problems of the organization as though they're their very own problems. And these are demonstrable, measurable impacts. But unfortunately, for years, neither CMOs knew the language or the teams around them invested in the CMO to understand all of the rubrics within HR. In addition to learning finance, a CMO has to understand the language of HR, but then translate that into that clinical physician and nursing and other ancillary staff into the care delivery in a way that it's an investment and not a constraint, to use the earlier word. So I really appreciate your mind on where you're thinking about this. This will take us to the next question.
Okay.
So, how have you experienced, or what is your opinion about organizations and systems, back to that system level, develop those emerging CMOs to acquire these skills and others to lead the transformation that's required in today's healthcare?
Yeah, thanks so much, Lee. That the concept of the CMO and their skill set, and you alluded to this earlier in the conversation, right? A early CMO historically was a clinically respected, very clinically sound person who understood things like credentialing, things like medical affairs. Persona has then evolved into someone who understands operations, right? And now we're pushing into the next piece of the evolution or next phase of the evolution, which is really the CMO who can lead transformation. And again, we've got CFOs who are leading transformation, COOs, CNOs. So they're part of a C suite team and leadership team that's leading this transformation. And they need to be set up to do that successfully. So what is that setup? I think the first thing, and this applies to everyone I just named, right, is that organizations first have to have a safe to fail environment. Because if that doesn't exist, it's hard to actually achieve transformation. We know transformation and innovation, right? It doesn't happen right out of the gate with the first attempt. It's usually iterative, there's failure involved, and if that's not accepted, you can't move forward, right?
Mhm.
So first is creating that safe to fail environment where iteration is just part of the package. Then we also know that transformation is a team sport. No one individual can do it by themselves. And so creating sort of meaningful cross-functional partnerships, a CMO with a CFO, a CMO with a COO, CMO with a
Mhm.
CNO, right? And all permutations of that. Those are critical because you need multiple people, multiple lenses, and multiple organizational priorities all working and driving in the same direction. Then you come to the skill sets, right? Because that's sort of the infrastructure and the scaffolding. Okay, so what do we need to fill this with? So CMO, I don't have an MBA either, right? We picked up these things along the way, but acquiring those skill sets on change management, operational excellence, and then so important as well today is digital literacy, right? Those are sort of some of the skill sets that the CMOs need to be literate in to be able to work effectively with those other partners that they have working to them working. And then at the end of the day, you don't have token CMOs anymore, right? We shouldn't have token CMOs anymore. So giving a CMO real accountability in the organizational goals, right? It shouldn't just be rhetoric that a CMO is part of a transformation team.
Yeah, I interviewed a guest a while back, and I'm very fond of her language. We joked about it. I said, "What does a CMO mean to you?" She said, "Chief Mascot Officer, also known as a Chief Token Officer." And I do think that there are places where that is true. And if you are a CMO listening and you're in that place, the first thing you should be doing is asking somebody, "Am I the mascot? Am I the token?" And if that's what you want, great. I'm going somewhere else. Or how about we change that and you invest in me and help me spend time with the CFO and the head of administrative work and HR and all of those elements to look, to your point, physicians are resilient by nature for the most part to get where they got. And they're also lifetime learners and curious. And not everybody needs to go back to school, but you do need to be developed and exposed and learn the language, whether it's in that boardroom, that conference room, on a Zoom call, to be effective. And I think you've stated a very nice case of what all those things are to lead transformation. And then ultimately, I encourage CMOs to get into operations. If they aren't in them, for them to be successful and for the physician benefit. And I believe that this is how you affect well being. Back to the burnout equation. It's structural, its demand is far greater than resource, time, and availability. So we need to level set that or even, invert that a little bit. So you have any additional thoughts about how CMOs can get involved in the well-being changes that are needed in our ecosystems?
We get to wander through every hallway in our care delivery walls, right? Down in the bowels of the hospital, in the operating rooms, in the most sterile and the most unsterile environment. We get to go there. We see and hear, and we're in the thick of all of these conversations all the time. We hear nurses, we hear our colleagues, we hear it in the doctor's lounge, we hear it in the operating room at the scrub sink, right? Everything that impacts the workforce is there. It's about having the ear and the eyes to take it in as you are experiencing it. Again, do you need an MBA? Not necessarily. Here's two doctors who don't have MBAs talking to each other about leadership and CMO optimization, if you will, right? And so I think that and I teach this to the medical students. I say, just simply keep your eyes and ears open. You will hear and see everything that you need to see. Be steeped in it. Understand, ask why, get involved in the conversations. Now, I find that once you get into a conversation that you are particularly interested in, that's when you go, well, maybe I can do something different about this, right? And whether it's operations or HR or well being or culture, in your own way, get involved. If it's something that matters to you, you've got colleagues that are being affected by this. And I think physicians are all the things naturally that you said, but they're also driven and they want to have impact. The most natural place to have impact is patient care, but having impact on our colleagues enables larger scale patient care to be bettered.
Again, you're entering a space in my mind that we have not entered on the podcast before, and I'm going to reframe what I just heard for the listeners. Physicians are, for the most part, wired. They volunteered to become physicians. They're wired to make a difference. Somewhere along the way, it feels like generically here in the US and perhaps in the UK and a few other countries, we stopped allowing them the opportunity to make a difference outside of that bedside exam room, emergency room moment. And if you allow it, I think you will find many more volunteers than you realize who are interested in making a difference. And they've been absorbing, listening, learning, hearing things for years. And if we give them a chance to speak about it and maybe invest some time into it, they will enable the difference that they want to make. I wonder if that connects with you in any way.
It absolutely does. And, I think that the core of physicians and why we come into this profession is we want to help others. I mean, that's sort of your medical student application essay. All in all our different ways said we wanted to help people. And I think for some of us that switch goes off in a different direction, or we seroconvert from helping patients directly to helping our colleagues to help patients. And there's lots of different ways to do that, right? There's operational impact, there is people impact, well being impact. All of these things do help physicians. And so, who better to do that than a physician themselves who understands what it feels like to be in the workforce?
Yeah, I agree. Well, let me borrow a phrase from the report that we talked about at the beginning of the show. I found this buried in there and just looking for your commentary. And if I got this right, leaders will be judged on whether digital investments reduce administrative burden, improve care, and support sustainable performance relative to the doctors in the organization. What are your thoughts and your comments about that phrase?
It's and when we say leaders, I think we think about who should those leaders be, right? And for the man on the ground, for the physician on the ground, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who they're pegging it on. I don't think it's one person. I think that whenever we think digital, this again goes to reflexes, right? When we think digital, we think IT. There's this one-to-one connection. But digital investment accountability is not an IT problem. IT has always been and is an enabler. So who should be asking IT what to do or telling IT how to help them, right, is really your CMO and COO. Now, again, this is one physician's opinion, right? But the physicians, the clinical team, they're the ones doing the work at the front lines. They need to define the workflow that works for them and their patients. Then the COO, the operations team, needs to define the execution. How are we going to operate in order to get the clinical team what they need? Now, this is then when the CIO or the CTO come in to say, okay, well, let's create the infrastructure to meet these operational and therefore clinical needs. So it's that triad of CMO, COO, and CIO end up creating the system that works. Now, investment accountability, you've got to have the CFO involved, right? Because the CFO is watching the finances very closely. But again, the CFO is not in the mix of the doing. The CFO is overseeing whether a digital investment is actually having a return. So from what I've said, I've tried to make it loud and clear that the CMO has to be involved in any kind of digital investment. And if the CMO is not involved, necessarily adoption's not going to be as successful as it could be.
Yeah. Um, so I'm going to go off script and have a little fun with this.
Great.
I think that this is so you said you're one doctor's opinion. Well, there's two of us, and I share this opinion. Early in my career, I had a mentor, and I hinted at it earlier. So there's two things that stay with physicians their entire career: who's on call, and how do you split up all the money. We've talked about splitting up the money and how the money can be an enabler and not a constraint. Who's on calls? Who's taking care of the patient? And the third rule is you never ask IT, you tell IT. And the fourth rule is you never ask legal, you tell legal how to get you out of the jam. Tell me how to avoid jail. Don't give me my options. Like, I'm just kidding. For all you listeners and my lawyer friends, I'm just kidding. But here's the point. You need to be able to have a spec sheet. If we do this, this is the output for that from the clinical care delivery, from the resource, from the burden, from the expectation. I think the era is shifting where physician leadership is beginning to say, yeah, that tool will be dramatically helpful to the daily work that people are doing, as opposed to the bright, shiny object landing in the clinic. And everybody says, what the heck is this? How does this meet our daily needs? It's meeting somebody else's. Fair enough. The EHR was a classic example. All of us believed when the EHR came around, it would be a data repository that would drive our clinical excellence. Like, how cool is that? Instead of flipping through the chart to find what I need. And it turned out it got co-opted for a variety of reasons for other things. And now I think we're trying to get back to easier documentation and still serves a billable event, better data management, and drives clinical outcome. So all that being said, I do think physician leaders have to be at the pointy tip of the requests and the demands. And the only way to get there is learning the financial language, the constraint language, the enabler language. So you just have to take the same abilities that you have to operate on a child or deliver the diagnosis of cancer to a young adult and take those skills and just learn some new things. But you also made a point that I want to drive home. We do have a need to shift our identity thinking and begin to, you said zero convert. And I would also add, we live in an operating system. Maybe for most of us, it's Windows 4. That was the operating system we got as a physician. To become a physician leader, you need to upgrade to Windows 12. And there's a lot of upgrades in between. And that's what we're talking about, to be at the pointy edge of the newest innovative transformational utilization of all the tools. So I'm rambling, but I'll give you a chance to react to that.
No, I love that. And I will also say that, it's not that IT exists to take orders from physician leaders, but again, it's two skill sets, right? The clinicians know what the clinical world needs to do. They know where their pain points are. They know where the traffic jams are, and they know in their heads, right, what could make their lives better. The IT folks know the skills and capabilities of the software, hardware, et cetera, et cetera.
comes up in almost every conversation that I have relative to physician leadership and the role of technology is if the tech team is not involved in the workflow design, good luck. And
Yep.
to your point, I'm going to use this tool that's evidence based and it's going to diminish my cognitive levels at its peak. Boom, boom, boom. I'm very confident based on my evidence, my clinical training. I have appendicitis. Now I just want to go to the OR. Can somebody else take care of the labor of the document? Otherwise, it's workflow. And now I got to type this. I can't even go to the OR without having this H&P on the chart because then that creates an audit compliance issue, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right? Yeah, I've been there, done this. So let's talk about culture because I think we've danced our way around the dance floor, but I think at the heart of all of this, understanding finance, understanding workforce, understanding workflow, at the core, we still have physicians and we have to manage this concept of retention and recruitment and making the environment a place worthy of working there, deploying clinical care. How do you see CMOs and other physician leaders driving culture in an organization? When everything is tight and constrained, we both acknowledge that, but how do you impact culture?
Yeah, that's the $1,000,000 question or the multi-million-dollar question. Because as you mentioned, culture is what drives recruitment and retention today. In the prior times, right, the biggest offer on the table was what won. And physicians today are looking for just different things. And culture is at the top of the list. It actually trumps compensation. Going back to the survey that we're talking about, physician executives actually said clearly culture trumps compensation. So maybe first, what is culture? We may define it as what we see and hear every day, but why? Why do we see and hear that every day, right? It actually goes back. Culture is not the messaging. Culture is actually what an organization, what a CMO for the clinical org, what a CMO tolerates and reinforces every day. What they tolerate and reinforce every day is what you will end up seeing and hearing every day. And so, very pragmatically, right, what is tolerated or not becomes the primary retention lever. And that is your huge financial driver right there. So, how do we get CMOs to impact this? First of all, CMOs have to be visible. I mean, they're the leaders, again, back to first among equals, right? They're the leaders of the physician organization, right? Culture does not seep through the walls of the ivory tower and go out by osmosis. It's a deliberate effort that has to permeate, physically permeate the environment. So when I think about CMOs coming out of their offices, making rounds. We make rounds on patients. If the people we're now taking care of are the physicians, we should make rounds on physicians, right? Eat in the doctor's lounge, not in your office. Eat in the cafeteria, not in your office. Go to the OR. How are things going? And so modeling those behaviors, creating that respect and trust by being present, engaging in genuine dialogue. It could be structured, but live, genuine dialogue, right? People like to measure engagement in surveys. That's okay. However, understanding engagement and putting your finger on that pulse in a live format brings so much more in both directions to a CMO's credibility and therefore ability to impact. I think another piece that's so important in culture is being able to hold peers accountable. And again, there's two components to this. One is the environment, right? Because it's not just what the CMO is doing, it's also what the CNO is doing and the CFO and sort of everyone else in the C-suite. And so that becomes the C-suite culture, which then permeates the rest of the organization. Again, holding peers accountable goes back to, the first thing I said around what we tolerate and put up with and what we don't. And those things send a very, very clear message. I think the other critical piece around culture is treating it like a KPI, not a soft concept. And what do I mean by that? It's being able to peg certain metrics to your culture and being able to build them solidly into people operations, right? So whether that's hiring, promotion, performance reviews, building them into incentive plans to send a clear message that, hey, these are the behaviors that align with our culture, and we will look out for them and we will reward them. Because if it's not visible in the day to day structure, it gets lost very, very quickly. Lives are busy, healthcare is complex, and there's 1,000 other priorities. But if it's built into the fabric of how things are done and how people are treated and the expectations around behavior, it takes on a different level of import.
Fascinating concept. Again, I've never heard this perspective. There's a small risk for the young CMO who's listening to this. I don't think you're suggesting, and I'm not advocating as a new CMO to become the chief metric officer. Don't do that. There are metrics. They have value. They are part of enabling the system to move in a particular direction, whether it's finance, retention, or culture.
Mhm. Right.
But 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 I will support any time a CMO says, Lee, I can't talk to you today. I'm going to go hang out in pre-op holding or outside the GI lab. I used to do that all the time. And like you described, the third year medical student, you listen, you watch, you absorb, you learn, and casually you engage in conversation. It's not a standard agenda formatted meeting where people are only going to share what's necessary to get out of that meeting. This is where you actually find out where what is the culture. And so if in another room you are measuring the impact in a more formal way and you think you're delivering because of the reinforced metrics or observation, make sure that's true down in the ED, make sure that's true in the ICU and in the physician lounge, late at night, early in the morning, not just when it's convenient for you at 10:30 in the morning. And then you can say, well, what I see and observe matches what we're measuring. And if not, then you got to keep doing that work. I couldn't agree with you more. I just want to throw that out as a word of caution, how to translate that back and forth and then share. Well, God, I'm so glad I heard that because, we were working really hard on this and it shows over here. Now I know it to be true. How does that sound to you?
I really like and I think about how that applies to different leaders in different situations and environments. I mean, for someone who's a new CMO coming into a new hospital or health system, you don't know until you go, right? You will hear from everybody else in the C-suite, you will hear from your direct reports, but until you actually go and put your finger on that pulse, you don't know.
Right.
So go right. I remember a colorectal surgeon who trained me, and he would, people would all be at the nurse's station talking about a patient, and he'd say, "Hey guys, throw caution to the wind and approach the patient." Right, and the patient will tell you more than the dashboards and the business intelligence and the people and the survey. Just go straight to the source. That will tell you what you need to know and it builds your credibility. Again, nothing to lose in that transaction. Your speed to impact will be much faster if you just go and be a part of the team you are leading.
Love it. Love it. Well, I'm going to ask you one last question. It's sort of an up or down vote, yes or no, and then we'll wrap it up. So, out of the survey, 2/3 of the executives that were surveyed are somewhat or very excited about the future, but only about 1/6 are less than excited, if not worried about the future. Are you excited about the future? Are you worried about the future? Where are you on this?
I think there's so much opportunity out there. I'm excited about the future, especially being able to now in my current position, think about how we optimize um, my constituents, right? Physicians. We have so much what we call burnout. Again, not a resilience issue. Right? I have 3 medical school classmates who have retired from clinical practice at a young age, and they're not doing locums, they're not doing consulting, they're playing golf. And that is not sustainable for our industry. We can't have people train for 20 years after high school and practice for 15 years and then leave the industry. Society cannot get good healthcare if we do that. So I think about how we will optimize the people. What are the structures that our leaders need to build? And what are we creating for our medical students and residents to enter into today? Match day just happened, and we hear about more residency programs coming online every year. We know there's going to be a shortage of physicians, and so we're pumping out more. That's great. But if we don't fix the system, we're just going to burn out more physicians as we pump more of them into the system. So I think that, we've got now a massive core of physician leaders out there. It's about us coming together as a community to build a workplace that is so attractive and that allows longevity in physician careers. That will make me happy. I think it's possible. And I think we have all the levers and all the people, all the smarts to do it today.
Great. Excellent. Well, thank you for that answer. And I'll give you the chance to add any last words or thoughts before I wrap up the show.
Well, again, I really appreciate your having me on your show. I think that CMOs have this just tremendous opportunity ahead of them in the people space to really think about their workforce. The future's bright.
Love it. Thank you for being on the show, Lee Ern, and sharing your energy, your passion, your optimism, insights into opportunities, and insights into leadership. It's been a fabulous show. Ladies and gentlemen, you have been listening to the Fire Chief Podcast, the only podcast dedicated to the Chief Medical Officer and brought to you by the CMO Group. Want to learn more about how you might take a look at your own physician workforce development plan? Then contact Ern Chen on LinkedIn. And if you want to learn more about transforming your career and becoming a CMO, then connect with me on LinkedIn and I'll set you up with the CMO Group and everything you need to lead in healthcare. I love talking with CMOs from all over the world. So get out there, develop those teams, strengthen your culture, retain your doctors, and be the greatest place on earth to work. But remember, whatever you do, in the words of Sergeant Phil Esterhaus, let's be careful out there.